It's Monday the 24th of January and you're listening to the Wild Poor Dog Podcast with Karen Wild and Jon Buskull. So Karen, did you break your leg?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't break my leg. For those of you that are wondering why we're saying this, it's because I've just been skiing in the Alps and it was really wonderful. We didn't have any powder snow. We just had icy stuff. So in fact, although I did have one amazing crash, by which I sort of ducked to miss a tree and landed in a pile of snow, but I was fine. It was actually really funny.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad you got back safe and sound. I missed you on Twitter.
Oh, I know. I missed everybody. So thank you for the messages that I did get, though. I've managed to answer all of them. I hope I haven't missed anybody.
I'd just like to say that, apologies if you were expecting the show to come out early last week or on the usual time. I was a bit late getting the show out because I had to go to Norway for 3 days on business, and the Wi-Fi connection on the coastal boat wasn't exactly brilliant.
It's a bit like where I was. I was a bit bereft. There was no internet. There was no 3G. There was. I could text. That was it. And actually, it was probably a good thing because you end up, don't you? As soon as you do anything on the internet, you're sort of sucked in for hours and hours. So it's probably a good thing all in all. But I did miss everybody, and it's been nice to catch up this week. I've had some great news from some of my friends on Twitter, and so looking forward to hearing from you all again. Really.
All right. So what have we got in today's show, Karen?
Well, we've got quite a nice, feely, warm news item to start off with. We're also talking about dogs that bite. And I know that it might be one of those subjects that people think, this isn't an issue that affects me. But if you look at the news and then compare it to the actual statistics and then look at the law and then look at people's past history with their dog owners, it is something that has affected all of us pretty much at some point or another in our lives. And there's a lot of myth around dogs that do bite. So I think I thought we should explore that a bit today, and sort of have a little look at the various viewpoints there are out there and debunk some of those myths, because there are a lot of old wives' tales about these things. And really, I think, people need to know what's the truth,
All right, Karen. Well, where should we start then? Should we start with your abandoned car chasing dog?
Oh, there was this, in the news, there was a dog called Ginger. And it's lame, and a man, it was captured on CCTV. Again, CCTV captures everything. The guy got out of the car, pretended to take the dog for a walk, and then ran back to his car and drove away. And the CCTV recorded this poor dog, this lame dog, limping after the car. So it actually chased after the car. Now, that was 4 months ago.
It was his owner who was abandoning him.
Yeah, the owner got out of the car, got the dog out of the car, pretended to take it for a walk, ran back to the car, jumped in the car and drove away. What
a bastard. I'm sorry, that's all I can say. What a bastard. I mean,
we won't get a clean rating on the podcast this week. I think things like this, anyone who works in rescue or works on the behalf of any of the RSPCA or affiliated places will know that these kinds of things happen quite a lot. This guy was caught. I think with the prevalence of mobile phones that people can film from, CCTV, a lot of sort of public sort of awareness of these things now, you can't get away with it as easily, and this poor little dog was 8 years old anyway. It's very sweet. I'll post the BBC News link because it's a cute looking dog. And anyway, they found it an owner. They've managed to rehome the dog. So the really, really good news is that Ginger has found a home. And I'm really happy because it looks like they took a lot of time in sort of finding the right placement. And obviously, because they read about the dog in the papers, everybody wants to rehome this dog. Do you know, John, I've also got some other good news. The advent calendar, do you remember that we ran over Christmas that I never stopped talking about? We had a little dog on there called Sammy, and Sammy was a Springer Spaniel. We put together a little video, and I found out today on my return that Sammy has also found a home.
Oh, brilliant.
So there are good endings to these things, so I'm pleased. That's two really good pieces of news, so I'm very happy about that.
I think what I'd like to say is it's great news about Sammy, but the guy abandoning the dog, I'm sorry, shame on you.
Yeah.
As a dog breeder, I always insist that if the dog needs to be rehomed or moved on, that it has to come through me as the breeder. I mean, contractually, I can require that. And I just think that, I mean, of course, if you're listening to the podcast, you're one of these people that loves your dogs, and but I do think, we need to make it part of what we do when we spread the word of living with dogs and what we feel about dogs, to tell people, if you have a dog that you want to rehome, sometimes it doesn't work out. Situations in homes change. Sometimes you can't cope with it. But rather than doing something like this, you have to seek, appropriate help. Go to your breeder, talk to your breeder, talk to, in our case here in Sweden, I might talk to the vet, see who they could recommend. Just abandoning your dog, that's the cowards. I think that's a cowardly way out. What would you do in the UK?
Well, they didn't get away with it. They didn't get away with it. Allegedly, these people dumped the dog. They are denying the charges, but they have been charged with animal cruelty. And I think, especially if the dog has some kind of injury, I think in this case the dog was arthritic and has had to have medication, which I understand is expensive, Yeah. But there are charges involved, and the trial hasn't come through yet. I think it's in April this year that the trial's coming through.
Okay, so we can't condemn them just yet.
Well, there's consequences. They've been caught on CCTV. The press have picked up the story and said, look, he dumped the dog, he ran back to the car. That's what it apparently looks like. But it does happen. I don't want to bring the whole podcast right down, but in a specific case with someone I know, the car was stolen, the dog was dumped out of the car, and the dog was killed because it was on the road. So these things, they do happen, and I think it serves as a kind of warning, although I don't ever think it's a deterrent. But we are part of a community. We all are, and I think the wider community can help. And I know that sounds a bit soppy, but I really believe that we can help people. And I think they get stuck.
I think that if you cannot cope, if you can't afford your vet's fees, because often this is a thing that I hear about. I've had with one of my own dogs that's been, placed with a lady that she was struggling with paying the fees. It's okay to say to a breeder, I'm struggling to pay the fees. Your breeder will understand, will help you find another home for the dog. It's much better to seek help than to just put your head in the sand and...
Well, yeah, it's all part of the proper process, isn't it? I think if you've got a really good breeder, it doesn't have to be a pedigree, it can be anything, it doesn't really matter. If you've got a responsible breeder, and I know that's such a hackneyed phrase, but somebody who really cares about their animals, they will always take the dog back. But if you're struggling, don't be embarrassed. I mean, I've had owners say, well, I'm too embarrassed to contact them. We've ruined their dog. And, no, you haven't. It just hasn't worked out. And okay, maybe things could have been done differently, but there's no point in kicking yourself then. It's too late. There's think of the welfare of the animal. That's what's happened in this case. The welfare of the animal was directly impacted by what appears to be their behaviour. So therefore they've been prosecuted. So, let's not get into the downside. Let's think of the upside. We could be really positive about this, and people can help. There are people there to help. Dumping a dog it's not a good way of dealing with it at all.
Karen, let's move on. Let's have some cheerful news. Have we got anything cheerful?
Have we got anything cheerful? I had some good news today. We're about to talk about dogs that bite in this podcast, but I'm not blowing my own trumpet here. This is really in praise of one of my clients, one of my owners. She's had a dog that was highly reactive to other dogs, and a big dog, and they've got two, and sort of basically jumps into the sky every time it saw another dog, and had actually ended up biting a dog locally, and was in all sorts of a pickle about what do I do, and I managed to turn it around. We've spent several months working together. She's worked really hard, and today I was able to take the stooge dog, which I'd taken with me, out of the car. Her dog didn't react. She did all the right things. The dog's still looking at her, happy as anything, walked straight past her dog, lots of other exercises, and the dog was fantastic. So well done you, if you're listening. I'm not going to name you because it's obviously confidential, but I'm absolutely thrilled to bits. So these things can be turned around. If you've got a problem with your dog, you can turn it around, and that's something that we'll go on to when we talk about dogs that bite as well. You can do things about it. So big smile on your face, I'm going to sort it out, rather
brilliant.
than oh no.
Oh, that's
so
brilliant.
that's brilliant news. Really happy about.
Definitely a big round of applause. Silent round of applause for that. That's really fabulous news.
Big pat on the back for the owner, she's put in a lot of work. I mean, she needed guidance, but that's what I'm paid to do. And the dog's turned around. It's not to say that he's 100% because I don't think any dog ever is. But, that's great. And I'm very happy for her. So that's real good news. Came away with a big smile on my face there too.
Okay, Karen, before we move on to the next segment of the show, let me just do this. All right, let's talk about dogs that bite.
Dogs that bite. Well, have you ever come across a dog that would never bite?
Oh, have I ever come across a dog? I think in my experience, every dog is capable of biting because they have teeth. Every dog is capable of biting. And, if I look at my lot, Aggie and Tia in particular is the sweetest girl. And I could never imagine her biting, but I know that as a dog in the right or the wrong situation, if she was provoked, she could bite. Absolutely.
And I think, do you know, actually, you're saying about while they've got teeth. Do you remember there was a dog, and I think it was owned, somebody listening will know who it is. It was a famous celebrity, I believe in America, and they had this dog. And it was claimed to have been cured by a dog guru over there as well. And in the end, they took its teeth out because it had bitten so many people. They actually took its teeth out and it was still gumming people. So even though, I know, bizarre. But there you go. That was just a side thing there. But the amount of times that I have been told that, my dog would never bite. And I think that the first myth to absolutely dispel is that they are all capable of biting. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to, but put them in the wrong situation. And yes, they're quite capable of biting. So I'm not sort of saying, oh, well, that's not true. What I'm saying is I think the odds are that every single dog is likely to do it in certain circumstances. And we've got to look at why they would do it. Why would a dog, just as last week, when we talked about barking, why is the dog doing it? So my dog would never bite. Well, if it was ill, if it was in pain, if you trod on its foot, if somebody grabbed hold of it and frightened it enough, then there's a chance that it would defend itself and it would use its teeth to do it. So as far as I'm concerned, my first thing that I would say is if someone says to me, oh, my dog would never bite, I would never take that as face value, ever. So it's not to say don't trust dogs or let's be really paranoid about it, because of course not. But I think, no, respect the fact that they would bite, just as we would like to think as nice people that we wouldn't go around punching people or biting them or kicking them. But we might if we were fighting for our lives. So, everyone knows this, I think, deep down.
I think I was going to say from the early stages, I mean, because I breed dogs, because I breed dogs, I mean, I see, small dogs, lots of small dogs, and they go through this sort of mouthing stage where they do want to bite everything in sight. And one of the things that I think you have to remember, if you bring a young pup into your house, from the word go, that, you do not let your dog assume or learn that putting its mouth, putting its teeth on you is okay. Now, I'm not saying that you should reprimand. What I do is I turn my back and walk away. As soon as the dog tries to, communicate with me by putting its teeth on me or its mouth, I walk away. And very quickly they get over this stage. So, I mean, do you have any tips from the start, Karen? Do you think that we can, stop, work against biting from an early age with dogs?
I think so. I think what you need to look at, I mean, Dr. Ian Dunbar is really, really done a lot of work on this, and I would recommend their website. I'll post the link on the show notes, all about how to teach bite inhibition. There have been studies to show whether or not this actually does work, whether the bite inhibition process works. To my part, I just think whether it works or not, I'm going to do it because it's not unfriendly. It's quite a nice way of dealing with things. You teach the puppy that, everything, skin, clothing, anything to do with a person is off limits, but you don't do it in an aggressive way. Like you say, you don't reprimand them in a way that terrifies them, but it needs to be enough of that really hurt, to make the dog jump back and go. Now sometimes, and depending on the dog and depending on the age of the dog, sometimes you have to be a little bit careful because it can actually excite them and actually make them do it more. But in those circumstances, generally, if I'm asked to assess a dog that's doing that, what I'm finding when I see it, and again, this is anecdotal from my case history, is that the dog is overtired in the first place and overstimulated, and probably could do with a little bit less of a full-on lifestyle from the family in general. And once it does that, it has the sort of headspace to learn the ow thing.
A full-on lifestyle. What does full-on mean?
Well, full-on, 100 miles an hour, never stop. Kids won't leave the dog alone. Dog's asleep and the kids go and wake it up. Even, get home from school and the puppy's sort of snoozing and they want to play with it. All normal things, part of every day. But you have to have these house rules, which are, at the moment, the puppy is resting. Okay? He's coming out later and he's coming out for half an hour or whatever. And then he's going to have another nap. And then he's going to come out again and we're going to take him out and we're going to socialise him. And that, that kind of thing. I also think it's not a good idea to play mouthy, rough games with the dog that are uncontrolled. So it's okay, have a bit of what they call roughhousing in the US. A little bit is fine, as long as it stays feather light and as long as it stops when you stop it. Not, I saw a dog, even while I was in France, it's going to be a very large dog, Mastiff type, playing with the dog and pulling their hands away and the dog's snapping at their hands. And he's, about 8 months old. So he's going to be a big lad. And I'm thinking, I can see a problem there.
Yes,
now, when you relate this, you relate this back. Yeah, I was going to say, you relate this back to the biting. What we just don't want the dog to learn as part of its everyday understanding of humans that any teeth on people is acceptable. It doesn't mean to say that they're never going to bite. But what it means to say is they learn levels. They learn a level of kind of bite inhibition. That means that if they ever do bite, and this is the theory behind it, if they ever do get put into that corner, that situation that they feel, okay, I've got no option but to use my teeth, then they don't bite hard. That's the theory behind it. So I think bite inhibition. I also teach the off command, which teaches the dog a bit of self-control, a bit of impulse control. That works really well too. In your own let's look at it from that angle. Don't panic, but look at it from that angle.
How do you distinguish between a nip and a bite? I mean, do you see a nip as on the same register?
It depends on the circumstance. I mean, we've probably all heard, I'm sure everyone listening's heard, it was only a nip. And I think there are scales. There's a few books that sort of grade bites. James O'Hare has a very, very good set of books. If you're interested in getting into assessment and that kind of treatment program, his books I do strongly recommend. He grades bites according to severity. So there would be, a front of the mouth nip going up to a kind of mauling, shaking type bite, and they're graded accordingly. So that you can factualize what you're seeing. Was it this? Was it this? Was it this? Was it this? So if it's a level 5, it's this. If it's a level 2, it's that. I think that if you've got a dog that's reacting to something by using its teeth, you've got to look at whether it's a nip, whether it's a full mouth bite. Doesn't really, to me, make a difference. I think this dog is defending itself using its teeth. Now, it's defending itself enough to make you stop. So it's doing the minimum force possible to make you stop whatever it is you're doing or whatever the other dog is doing or the child is doing. So it was only a nip. I'd still deal with it in the same way. I certainly wouldn't start sirens wailing, in a big panic. I would treat it the same as any bite. But I always do ask my clients, if there has been a bite involved, well, how severe was it? The reason I do that is because I'm looking at how long has this dog had to learn bite inhibition, how many times has it been pushed beyond its level of tolerance? That's what I'm looking for when I want to know, was it a nip? Was it a heavy bite? Not, it was a nip, we can ignore it. I would never do that.
If a dog bites several times, I mean, these small little, not something that draws blood or something, but if a dog regularly uses its mouth teeth to communicate with someone, what do you do, Karen?
What do you do? Well, I would, I do get told this quite a lot. The dog's bitten a few times, but it's not aggressive. A lot of people say it's not aggressive. What do you do about it? Well, if the dog is biting you as a way of saying get lost, then that shows me that the dog is not comfortable with whatever is going on around it. It might just be that the person's walking across the room. So it might be completely innocuous. That they're just doing their everyday thing and the dog decides that it doesn't like somebody encroaching in its area and decides to chase them off and will bite them to do that. There's lots and lots of reasons why a dog might do that. So my first thing would be, when I'm looking at how to deal with it, is not to deal with the bite itself, is to deal with what's causing the dog to react in a defensive way. So I would want to know, what the situation was. Why did the dog where was the dog? Where were you? Where was the person that it bit? What happened straight afterwards? They're all standard questions that we should be asking. But when people turn around to me and say, oh, the dog's bitten, and you think, okay, it's usually the worst bite that I get the call after, but it's not always the first bite.
Well, that was what I was going to ask, actually. If your dog, nips a few times, and this is a behaviour you haven't witnessed before, or maybe does make a small bite, is this the point that you try and tackle it yourself? Do you go and read something, or should you really, go out and speak to a behaviourist, a trainer, straight away? Do we nip it in the bud? No pun intended.
It's a terrible pun, isn't it? I think that a lot of people, first of all, are in shock and they try and deal with it themselves. Then I think that they usually trawl the internet. That's what I would do. I would look through the internet, and I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but the first thing I do when I've got a problem, quickly Google it. What do I do? And there's an awful lot of advice out there. Then I assess how serious it is. But the problem is with doing things like that is that you don't necessarily get a good perspective. You get a skewed perspective based on whatever information you happen to come by. Plus the fact, let's not forget, you're not going to think your own dog is an aggressive dog because they're your dog. Most of the time, if you've had them from puppy, you've lived with them all your lives. They've probably shown signs of this a little bit, but it's not that bad. So you ignore it because the rest of the dog is lovely. And all the time, people that have had a dog that's even one that's bitten really severely, they say, but they're not aggressive, because in their head, they've got this image of a kind of nasty, slathering beast that's going to, bite everything in sight. And that constantly growls and barks. And of course, that's not what their dog is like, because it's their pet. So I think it's time to kind of debunk that idea of what an aggressive dog looks like. If your dog has bitten, even once, you need to speak to somebody who knows what they're doing as soon as possible. The reason I say that is because only somebody who's used to dealing with biting dogs all the time can get the right perspective for you, because what they can do is base it on their knowledge, their experience, and then say, okay, here's how I think this might pan out if you deal with it in this way, and if you deal with it in another way, here's how it might pan out. So I definitely don't think that you should panic. I do think that you should look at it from a very clear, cold perspective if you can. That doesn't mean rush them straight to the rescue, the dog pound. It doesn't mean straight to the vet to be put to sleep. That it's not necessarily something like that. Of course, that's a personal decision, and the vet will talk it over with you if something like that happens. But it could be the dog's just had an operation. It could be that the dog is in pain from something you don't know about. It could be that the dog bit through panic, that it's come across something it's never seen before, and bang. Could be something new that the dog's never come across, like lots and lots of people, or a new person, or somebody they've always been a bit iffy about who finally tipped the balance. Old age is another one. Dog's getting older, its sight's not as good, maybe its hearing's not as good, maybe you made it jump and it was sound asleep. And also, like we've said, a puppy. I do get a lot of calls from people who are worried that their puppy is mouthing and they don't want it to become aggressive. And, all of those things, an expert will help you and they will advise you on that. So don't panic. Don't panic.
Is it something that can escalate? I mean, this kind of, that first of all it starts nipping, and if it's not tackled with, that it can get bigger. If you can actually hear a few woofs going on in the background there, that's because right outside my window where I'm recording this, I can see 3 Basset Hound puppies jumping around and playing in the snow and getting a little bit excited. Sorry about that. So my question, Karen, is, does it escalate?
In my experience, invariably, yes. That sounds like, it's awful. But no, I think if you deal with it in the right way, then no, it won't escalate. But I think if you try and ignore it, hope it doesn't happen again, say the dog's not aggressive, it's just a one-off, he didn't mean it. I'm sure the dog did mean it, because otherwise it wouldn't have done it. But what you're doing is you're projecting the responsibility away from the situation. You need to look at the situation. You need to be really honest with yourself and think, how bad was it? What did I do? What am I going to do next? If you haven't got an answer for what am I going to do next, that, you might have an answer from the internet, you may or may not, that you haven't run by somebody who deals with biting dogs on a regular basis, then yes, and certainly ignoring it, in my experience, leads it to escalate, which is why sometimes I see dogs that have bitten 6, 7, 8 times. I get a call about the one bite, but when I sit down and have a chat with the owner, and I'm not there to judge, I'm there to help. We have a good old chat, we go through it, and maybe over about an hour and a cup of coffee, I find out the dog's bitten a lot. And what I see is then an established bite history. And the problem with that is that the dog now has a really, really ingrained habit that when something happens in a certain order, that's what it does. And it has learned to do that once, and then again and again and again and again. And of course, then it's even harder for anyone to help sort it out because, it's gone on for a long time. I see dogs that have been biting for 3 years, and you just think, when is it going to become so bad? Yeah. When is the last bite? What's the last bite going to be? What are you waiting for to happen? So I think you need to gather it all up and say, right, okay, here's the scenario. This is what happened. This is what happened. Is this scenario likely to happen again? What are the risks?
If I can concept check, Karen, just to rephrase or clarify what we've just been talking about. So if you're, every dog is capable of biting. We agree on that. Absolutely. The risk is that if your dog starts out nipping, that it can escalate and that you need to approach, any kind of mouthing behavior from the very, very beginning with the right kind of approach. That with young pups, that we walk away from the dog or that we ignore it, that we don't play mouthing games, that we don't get into this habit. I often see, people put their hand in the dog's mouth, in a pup's mouth, and go, oh, it's all right, it's all right. The trouble is that, 7 months later, it's going to be a 40-kilo dog with full-size teeth. So, none of this playing games. If something does happen, the internet's a good port of call, or to talk to a behaviourist, a trainer, someone who's helpful. Don't rush off to the pound or to the vet. If, to get rid of your dog, if it's a first-time bite, it's something that needs to be looked at, to thought through. Perhaps you've actually been conditioning the dog to have this as a natural response. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, although I say don't panic, I think what most people do is they assess a risk, ongoing risk, but that's based on their perspective. So if you decide that the biting isn't a problem, but that you are, a childminder with lots and lots of children coming and going, and the dog had just bitten one of your own children, then that is a high risk scenario.
Sure.
So you might want to look at it and be very honest with yourself and say, look, I absolutely adore my dog, but there is a risk here. So I always try and counsel people to kind of look at that risk and think, is this something you can manage? And how long is it going to take you to retrain it? And in between that, in between this kind of pinnacle of achievement that we could get to, what's the risk going on along with that? And I think that sometimes is a bit of an eye-opener for people. So if you deal with it in the early stages, it's much, much easier to prevent future biting. You do have to be aware of the law as well. If you know that your dog may bite, and certainly if it may bite a person, then you have an awful lot of responsibility. I don't want to go on about the law today, but, changing to a positive mindset is what you need to do. Obviously, it's upsetting and everyone's upset and it's so embarrassing, and if your dog's done something like that, how terrible. But change to a positive mindset. Think, right, we are going to deal with this. This is what we're going to do. And in 3 months' time, we're going to review it, or 6 weeks' time. We're not going to just hope that it doesn't happen again, because, that's not the most positive thing you can do. It's just denying it, So let's be really full on about it and say, yeah, okay, whoops, this happened. Oh dear. Okay, sort out whatever's happened. Try and sort out any damage that's been caused. Not cover it up. Be honest about it. And then think, right, we're going to deal with this because we love our dog so much and we really don't want it to get into more trouble than it's already in.
To take action immediately. What do we...
Yeah, positive action, yeah.
Positive action. From a human perspective, if you get bitten, what should you do?
If it's a dog that you know, you have to make a decision whether you're going to report it or not. And that is all part of, the dog laws that exist. If you decide whatever happens, you have a wound. If you've got an open wound, you should go and get it checked by a nurse. It doesn't necessarily have to be the doctor, I don't think, but you do need to be careful because obviously it can get easily infected. And certainly when I have been bitten in the past and it's been an open wound, they wouldn't stitch it together because... I should point out it wasn't my own dog that bit me, but because they don't want to, keep the infection in, so they tend to like to keep an eye on it. So So just, do nip over to your health centre and get it looked at. There is also a big crush injury from a bite, and that can really cause more damage. So again, get it checked out. It's pretty painful, and there's a lot of bruising. So if you've got, depending on it, especially if it's a child or an older person, do consider that it's not just whether the wound is open. If the dog's bitten but it hasn't actually broken the skin, there's still a big crush injury, and it's jolly painful. So do check that.
Yeah, I don't quite understand that crush injury.
A crush injury. Well, if you think about a dog's jaws coming together, crush. And I'm not sure of the different poundage of the power of the bite, but I watched a program about wolves once, and it was just, they measured the poundage of the wolf bite, and it was extremely powerful. Now, even your average Jack Russell is going to have a real sort of crushing action between those jaws. So the bigger the dog, the more the crush injury. The problem with a crush injury, I'm not a casualty expert or anything, but because it mashes all the tissues in between in your skin, and it causes quite nasty damage, because obviously there's consequent swelling. So having had one or two, they aren't pleasant, and I do think go and get it looked at, because they can be hugely painful, and you really don't want to get an infection from it at all.
I mean, this is obviously a very, very important subject, and there's obviously it's very likely that there's a lot of misleading information out there, especially on that big old internet. Could you just remind people, Karen, what qualifications you have to be talking about such a key issue?
Oh, it's like I put on the spot. Well, I've worked with dogs for now, it's been about 18 years. I'm a qualified dog trainer with the British Institute of Professional Dog Trainers, and I'm also a behaviourist accredited with the Association of Pet Behaviour Counsellors. So that doesn't mean to say that I'm not a doctor and I'm not a vet, but I do work with dogs that bite, and I do work with families and owners of dogs that bite. And knowing the law is part and parcel of what we have to do. So I think taking all that into perspective, just if your milkman says, it was just a nip, he won't do it again. This is my dog, it's not aggressive, he didn't really mean it. That's not the right sort of advice. I'm not saying I'm the only person out there that advises. Obviously, there's an awful lot of qualified people out there that really do know their stuff. And those are the people that you should be asking. Yeah. Really, really, get the help that your dog deserves and that your family deserves too.
Yeah. Okay, Karen. Well, I'm sorry to put you on the spot there, but I did feel that as it's such a big issue, it's really important to say that, that you, Karen Wild, are a qualified trainer, that you're registered and that you have a professional qualification within the UK. And I think that's really important to get across. What if people have comments or questions about dog biting, whether it's concerns or stuff? What can they do?
Yeah, no, I mean, everyone's got a story to tell. I absolutely love hearing from you all. So thank you, those of you that write in. I know some of you are shy and don't want me to mention you, but thank you. So yeah, by all means, send us a tweet on Twitter. You can find me as Wildpaw, WILDPAW. So that's www.twitter.com/wildpaw. So give me a little signal on there, and I'll say hi, and we have a chat. Or you can email us on podcast@karenwild.co.uk, and I'll put that link onto the show notes as well. So, send us your stories, because I love reading about your dogs, and I love hearing about what you've got to say. We did get some very interesting comments about the stray dogs issue that we did, and also the dog identification one. That caused an awful lot of comments. So, we love hearing from you. Please do write in.
All right, Karen, as time's nearly up, I thought I'd tell you about Dearborn, my barking basset. He's doing a bit better.
How's it going?
Yeah, he's
After
doing a bit.
Yeah,
I think he's doing a bit better. I've been working on training him to spend time on his own. Of course, that's very difficult in a house with 6 dogs, including him. But yes, I've been, giving him a bit of time on his own, and then rewarding him when I come back. And that certainly helped. But he's still, I think, when he's out of the dog room, when he's got another dog there, he's much more secure. He doesn't tend to bark. But I have noticed that if he's too long away from someone else, from a dog and from me, then he seems to sort of panic a bit and yelp. As soon as someone comes back, as soon as another dog comes back, he settles down. So we've been trying to work with that and to build his confidence, to spend a bit more time on his own. This is the first time I've ever had a dog with this issue.
And it's only been, what, a week? Is it a week and a bit since we last talked about it?
Something
So,
like that,
it's take I mean, this goes for everyone as well. I mean, take a long-term view, but make it a goal. So I always say, if you're trying to sort out an issue and you've identified it, and assuming you've correctly identified the problem, take a long-term view, but set yourself a goal. So don't think, oh, well, I'm just going to do this and see what happens. Think, right, in 3 weeks' time, I'm going to do this from now on. In 3 weeks' time, this is my goal. I want to be here. I want this to be happening. So, for example, with Dearborn, we could say, okay, in 3 weeks' time, obviously going at his pace, but what we want to see is at least a 50% improvement on his behaviour. So you need to take a base level, right? He couldn't even have a person walk out of the room without barking. And now we want to be able to see that you can go out for maybe 20 minutes and come back. Do you know what I mean? So I talk statistics and percentages. They're not that exact. But what I'm trying to do is give a scientific feel to it, for you to then be able to assess it properly and away from the emotionality of it, which again goes back to what we talked about with biting. When it's your own dog, it's so difficult. It really is to assess what really is happening.
I've got, he's not, because I've got, 3 big dogs, and he's one of 3 4.5, 5-month-old pups that I've got left from the litter. It looks, and I don't want to jinx it, but it does start to look like I found a home for him. With a family that already have one of our other Bassets, a 2-year-old George. And when I was talking with them at the weekend, I was stressing that, it's really important that if you do take him on, and they haven't decided either way yet, but if they do take him on, that they continue to work with him, not just let George take care of him all the time. And I found myself that the best way to track things is, and we talked about this before, is to keep a doggy diary, is to actually have a plan, actually know the sort of time lengths that he can cope with, just to sort of get a sense of where he's headed. But I think he's beginning to do well. I'm quite happy. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Well,
I said to somebody today, because they were asking what they could do about. In fact, we're going to talk about this next week, about their reactive dog. Dog reacts to other dogs, and reacts by barking and things. And I said, well, one of the reasons it gets wound up is because they always walk it in the same direction. So the dog's very highly strung before they've even started out, and then it sees another dog and it goes up like a rocket. And I said, well, you could vary your walk and, say, for a couple of weeks, walk it in the other direction and build it up and sort of, And then the answer was, well, I haven't really got time to do that. I don't really want to do that. I want to get to the field so that I can let the dogs off the lead. And I can imagine people listening rolling their eyes at that. But it's real life. That's what people do. They don't want to have the level of inconvenience all the time. So what we've got to try and do, and what my job is sometimes, is to say, well, what would be an acceptable level for you? So keeping a diary is a great idea. Having a goal is a great idea. But people don't always do that. So what I end up saying sometimes is, as long as you've got more pluses than minuses, as long as you're seeing an improvement that is bearable for you, then that's a good thing. And I would never point the finger at somebody who couldn't be as thorough as maybe I would be, maybe you would be, maybe some of our listeners would be. As long as they are seeing an improvement that suits them, then that's okay. So although I sometimes bang on about it a bit, I just think how much you put in quite often is how much you get out. And as long as you're accepting that, then that's not an issue. That's fine. Put in loads of work, you'll probably get a really good result. If you're a bit haphazard, you won't get such a good result. But it's the real world, isn't it? That's what life is.
Exactly.
Haphazard.
Exactly.
Like my skiing efforts last week. Extremely haphazard.
Well, before we go, I think it's important to say that if you're interested in putting together your own tailor-made training program, go along to Karen's site, which is at intellidogs.co.uk. And for a very reasonable price, you can put together your own tailor-made sort of training, which builds on some of the things that we talk about in the show from week to week. If you have any comments based on what we've been talking about today, send them along to Karen at
podcast@karenwild.co.uk.
Or send Karen a message on Twitter. That's twitter.com/wildpaw. And if you're interested in any communication solutions, if you're looking for a podcast for your business or any help with your website or copy, you can contact me at twitter.com/JonBuskell, JONBUSCALL, or visit my website. That's jontusmedia.com, JONTUSmedia.com. Well, Karen, I think we're done for this week.
Yeah, I feel like I've sort of talked down a lot today, and I need to talk up a bit, So, but I just think, I try and be really honest and serious about the issues that affect us all. So I hope you like the podcast, everybody, and like Jon says, do send us your comments because I do like hearing from you. So next week we are going to be talking about one of those really hotter than hot issues, which is if you've got a dog that reacts to other dogs, what do you do? How do you react to, your dog setting off at other dogs everywhere you go, every place, even the sniff of a dog outside the window sends them into a frenzy. How do you deal with it? So we're really going to look at that in more detail.
All right, Karen. Well, until next time, take care.
And you. Speak to you soon. Bye.